Good afternoon, everyone. We are glad to welcome all of you far and wide to our Sunday service beneath the canopy of the great brotherhood of light. As we take up today a greater in-depth exploration of the principles of God's will, of human free will, of the divine right as exercised by the God presence, in contrast to human free will. I'm going to invite all of you, hopefully you will have at your fingertips a wonderful decree which we give entitled The Face of the Firstborn. The Firstborn being your own mighty I Am presence. For we understand that one of the greatest miracles of all of life is the miracle whereby God Almighty, the One Presence, does indeed live as an individual presence using a spiritual body that can have a glorious countenance, a vision and a sight that is able to focus its attention directly upon us, that we are able to commune as into a cosmic mirror with this image of this individualization of the presence, whom we are coming to know as the truth of our identity. It is very important that we regularly climb the summit of attunement to this great realm of ascended master God reality, where our own true identity and individuality is alive and well. Touching that rock of identity, whom we are, and bringing back into our waking consciousness that awareness, drawing on its power, drawing on its assurance of the reality of identity that we are each one, and triggering the release of that great power out here into this world of form. So I'll invite you to turn with me then to the face of the firstborn. Where is found the magnet of the great light eternal, there shall the eagles be gathered together. O children of the light, thou flames of the morning, ye sons and daughters of the Most High, lift up thine heads, gaze into the bright face of the firstborn. Behold the starfire sun, the magic presence I am. Lo, the majestic countenance, lo, the radiant smile of eternal youth and beauty. Fix in mind each noble feature, mark well such regal ease and bearing. Let royal robes and scepter of that divine estate be etched in memory forever. Thus shall ye wield the selfsame rod of power, and befits thy birthright eternal. This day doth thy knight commander raise his sword on high, and signal terminus to the long exile of all thine earthly pilgrimage. Join now our glad procession of firstborn Christed one. All creation sing the happy anthem of thy Odyssey victorious. 'Tis the glorious festival of the grand return. I am that I am. I am alive forevermore. I am abundant celestial life, everywhere made manifest. I am Alpha and Omega, the first and the last. I am eternal youth and beauty. I am God, the one without a second. I am here and I am there. I am limitless, omnipresent substance, bringing everything into form. I am perfect sight and hearing. I am the active presence of God, the source of all life and intelligence. I am the ascension in the light. I am the bread of life. I am the eternal, transcendent, electronic body of ascended Master Light. I am the Good Shepherd, giving life to all. I am the guardian presence. I am the healing presence. I am the illimitable light of God, everywhere made manifest. I am the kingdom. I am the power. I am the glory of love, conquering all. I am the light in the holy mountain of God. I am the light that lights every man and woman who comes into the world. I am the manifest perfection of being. I am the mastery and dominion of God, everywhere in action. I am the miracle working presence, everywhere in action. I am the one almighty presence, everywhere in action. I am the open door which no man can shut. I am the peace commanding presence. I am the perfection of the mind of Christ. I am the presence of the Holy of Holies, the secret place of the Most High, and the heart of the great, great silence. I am the presence, intelligence, principle, light, power, activity, substance, and omnipotence of divine love, everywhere in action. I am the resurrection and the life. I am the quenchless flame, the eternal dazzling light and scepter of divine authority and dominion. I am the serene, majestic, conquering presence. I am the Son of God. I am the voice of truth, proclaiming perfect freedom to all. I am the way. I am the truth. I am the life. All this I am, forevermore. Amen. As most of you know, one of the most fond hopes, desires, and resolute determination on the part of the Ascended Masters is that there should be a wholesale change for the better in life as it is lived here in this world. The Masters have coined a phrase for the ideal world in which we should live. They have called it now for many thousands of years a golden age. And each July, the Temple of the Presence, under the direction of our beloved Saint Germain, strive to advance the cause of this golden age by developing more and more many of the different aspects of such a golden age, how it would come to pass, what it would look like, and so on and so forth. Today, we take up one aspect that has always been a challenge to the Ascended Masters themselves as it relates to the bestowal of a golden age in this world of form. It has to do with a particular aspect of mortal consciousness, or what we call many times human consciousness. Human in the sense as contrasted over and against the divine self, or the divine consciousness that can take the place of the human consciousness. One of these quirks of human nature, actually a key to the mystery of how human beings, human nature, came to be in the first place is an understanding that at its root, mortal existence and human existence has been an existence that has long ago been determined by a part of life that chose to separate itself from the Godhead, to define itself as having a separate and distinct countervailing operation, a free will exercise, if you will, that chose to go its own way rather than cooperate with the source of that consciousness that has given it life and sustenance through all of these times. This really does not need to be a great deal of confusion. It doesn't need to generate confusion in your world. The idea that there is a separate self that has created a set of beliefs and exercise for its own nature that is distinct and defines itself as separate from the source that has brought it forth. In one sense, whether it is hidden, whether it is covered over, or whether it is obvious, this human self has defied the will of God, the will of its own source as the I Am presence, and is essentially in a state of rebellion against that will of the God presence. It was due to this initial choice to go its separate way that the so-called fall of the human race came to pass. And a lot of what we have seen down through recorded history and long before is the whole dreary chain reaction of cause and effect that all stem from the entering into duality of the separation by human will from the divine will. This is a very important point because at this stage in the process, most human beings have lost the vast preponderance of the power that they once had. The crystal cord, the stream of life that sustains them from their own God presence has been reduced to the merest little trickle charge, just enough to keep life in the body and keep consciousness flowing. Outer power, for the most part, has been stripped away, and the ego gets by in what has become a struggle for existence, has become a process of labor, of moving from one thing to the other. Now, you might say to yourself, well, if this lack of energy and lack of power is the reason why mankind are so bereft, the solution is quite clear. Bestow more power, bestow more light and energy, and all will be well. For who would be so foolish as not to choose what is best for them? As someone once said, there's the rub. For what will happen when there is that conferment of greater form of life, freedom of expression, of opportunity, freedom of expenditure of life's energies? Unfortunately, the track record, the patterns that have been set up work against the what would seem to be the logic of this conferment of free will. Here we live in southern Arizona, in an area of the world that is has a lot of high desert in it. Certainly there is life and vegetation, but there are also prolonged periods when the rain does not fall. There are other places, other desert regions of the world that are even more extended in the periods of drought that occur to them. Consequently, life forms of plant and animal life have adapted to this bereft state of not having the waters of life. And they shrivel up. Many of them go into a state of suspended animation. The little amphibian frogs and reptiles and so forth burrow into the ground, may sleep for years in that state, waiting for the moisture of life to come into their part of the world, for that water to puddle and for it to awaken them. Similarly, plant life will also go into a suspended state. And then when that water that does finally come, there is an intensity of life that quickly goes through an entire reproductive cycle, many times in the matter of a few weeks, coming to its fulfillment, reproducing, dying off, and then beginning that period of suspended animation once again. That, frankly, is in one sense a pretty good metaphor for the nature of the human ego. For a great deal of the time, it doesn't have a lot of power, a lot of total discretion with a wild abandon of either economic freedom, political freedom, the freedom of a young, healthy, vibrant physical form, whatever kinds of freedom may be involved. And so the person gets along with that ego kind of also repressed, also suspended in its animation, also beneath the surface. And you might say the individual many times will appear to be on their best behavior, just waiting for the sunshine of life to ray upon them and bless them with the things that they are obviously so in need for. The test and the initiation comes when there is, at long last, the conferment of some degree of freedom and opportunity upon that life stream. And the question is whether it will be redirected into the expressions of the outer ego, whether that ego will become all puffed up and inflated, whether it will usurp to its own prerogatives the light and the energy which have been entrusted into its care, or whether it is going to be able, whether or not the heart within that self is going to be able to assert itself and actually attune to the will of its source and put down the voices of that outer self. This is a fundamental issue which confronts the brotherhood, the lords of karma, and those who would sponsor a golden age at all times. You may see the challenges in this regard as it relates to each and every one whom we now know are numbered amongst the ascended masters. In the case of our beloved Jesus, so beloved far and wide by billions across the world now for 2,000 years, you may observe that his presence and his own heart elected to test the strength of his own divine spirit as to whether or not that spirit had at long last arrived at the point where it was able to rule this outer self when that conferment of power takes place. Oh, the subtleties that come with this stage of development and of initiation. The examples of his 40 days in the wilderness should serve as an object lesson to all of us, because he did have that power within his free will capacity. He had the ability in his finer bodies of his thought and feeling world, together with the pranic forces in his physical form, that no part of life could have said to him nay. Had he elected to transmute a stone into a loaf of bread, the entire cosmos would not have refused him that election. Had he elected to cast himself down from the high place so that he would be rescued by angels and praised by all, no one would have been able to prevent that from occurring. Had he elected to reach for the apple of power that was offered to him, the power to command and rule mankind, he could have, at least for quite some time, utilized that ability within himself to exert that kind of power over his fellow men, to have that power over the world. These urges, which were symbolically represented as coming from some external tempter, were in fact the impulse of the human ego that is a dual, separate, rebellious expression that is not part of the God identity, the God presence. And his ability to pass those temptations, those initiations, is what allowed the great love of his consequent ministry and service and the example that he set before mankind for that to occur. This continued throughout the full time of his ministry. We don't have the time today to go into the many examples of that, but he was always on guard. When his mother suggested that maybe it was time for him to go public with his ministry, time for him to demonstrate these abilities by turning the water into wine at the marriage in Cana, he initially checked that impulse. And only upon reflection with his presence did he realize that the time had arrived to give that demonstration. At the end of his ministry, as is to be expected of every fiber of life within the body, within the soul, that body and that soul wish to continue to go on with life. They wish to continue to express. And there is that impulse for self-preservation. And hence we have the great drama yet again in the Garden of Gethsemane, when time and time and time again, he made that ultimate attunement with the voice of his own I am presence, which he called Father, praying that if possible, he not have to go through that particular initiation, but nevertheless, being able to put down the impulses of the outer self and to hold them suspended so that the God presence would be able to have its way through his life. That is the path and the example that each and every one of us must have, must walk, must choose, must attain to shift the center of gravity of our sense of our selfhood, of who and what we are, from this action of the outer self into the action of the God presence, and know that that voice of the presence speaking is the one to whom we should surrender, that we should give obedience to that voice of the mighty I Am presence. Other examples that we have of where the same power was present, but it was not checked when the impulse of the outer self came along. You have, of course, a number of examples in the case of Moses, where God instructed him to speak and to precipitate the flow of the water that was needed. And instead, he allowed his own agitation, his own sense of anger and resentment against the rebellion of the children of Israel in the wilderness, so that he, in anger, struck the rock. And you notice that the first time he did that, nothing happened, because it was not the proper use of that power. But in that insistence and in that conferment of that power, he was able to strike the rock yet again and insisted willfully that that use of the power that had been transferred from the higher realms into the use of the four lower bodies, that he insisted that it be used in that manner. One other example we've used from time to time, following the time of Pentecost, when the cloven tongues descended upon the apostles, and there was a transfer of this power into their four lower bodies, into their ability. They were able to communicate, they were able to heal, they were able to do many miraculous things because that power had been transferred from the ascended master octaves through the life stream of the now ascended Jesus Christ into their worlds. And once it was there at their discretion for them to use. And you have the example of St. Peter being engaged in a riptide of scarlet irritation and righteous indignation at Ananias and Sapphira, the fact of their misrepresentation of their giving of their all, so that not once but twice, these two, not just one of them, but one after another in succession, that power was used destructively to literally deny these life streams of the breath of life. I mention it in series because there was the opportunity after the first misuse of that light and power for reflection, for perhaps a little sense of regret. But no, on the other hand, that righteous indignation, that sense on the part of St. Peter, allowed this to occur yet again. So this is a principle which the Ascended Masters are keenly aware is something that they must deal with when it comes to advancing the cause of a golden age. You think about the many things that are involved that you would have be a part of a golden age. Perfect health, abundance, wonderful fellowship, protection, an ideal society, that the lack of a need to use mortal warfare as a means of defense. All of these types of things do require a supernatural exercise of the divine light of the God presence and of the brotherhood. And they must be utilized in accordance with the law of octaves by unascended life streams. For it is not possible for the ascended masters any longer from their level to do these things for the world's benefit in this world. Certainly, they can do these things for themselves, but when it is the world that is to be blessed, there must be the law of octaves. If you reflect upon this for a moment, you will notice that wherever there has been an exercise of power, there has always been the Son of God or the daughter of God in incarnation who has been the focus, the chalice through which that power has necessarily flowed in order to perform the work. So this then becomes a great challenge on the part of the Ascended Masters, is to raise up a body of life streams who are mature enough in their own Christhood that they are able to check the impulse of the mortal voices of thought and feeling. And this includes the impulse of the outer mind that thinks that it knows best and will allow instead for the Ascended Masters to do what they must do. I might point out to you that even following the ascension, this principle is one that is part of the fabric of life at inner levels, at the level of the Ascended Master octave, and all of the levels of the hierarchy, all the way to the great central sun. I'll give you one example in the case of our own beloved Saint Germain. He made the observation that many times there are those, such as himself, being an Ascended Master, who will not have the dispensation to do certain things, even from their level. They will not have the nod of the karmic board or necessarily the attainment at their level to do such things on their own initiative. For example, when Rex and Nada and Bob and Pearl were going to be trained in Chananda's retreat, Saint Germain indicated that his anticipation was that this would take a full 2 years for them to accomplish what was intended for them at that time. Along comes the great divine director, a hierarch of beloved Saint Germain, a much greater authority, who from his level set aside that entire 2-year cycle, reducing it to a mere 2 days. So you see, even amongst the Ascended Masters, there is a bending of the knee to cosmic law. There is a recognition of the greater sense of the wholeness and the authority of the God presence. No one is more keenly aware of this because it relates to the whole issue of free will and the whole issue of freedom than our own beloved El Moria. I well recall the Ray Room session that we had with him on the eve of our departure for our trip to England. We were going to discuss the adept sons of England. And I made the observation that all of those who loved King Arthur, if they only knew that he was going to be addressing them publicly, how the many multitudes would come and flock to be there with him. And the words were barely out of my lips when he shot back and made the observation that people have their own King Arthur, whom they have envisioned for themselves. But if they were to have the real El Moria, he would quickly become the dweller on the threshold whom they would uninvite, because they would not be comfortable in the sterling ray of the will of God. And it is quite interesting to see how even amongst those who are El Moria's disciples today, who swear by his flame and swear by his name, how they have started to dress up the Chohan of the first ray in a kind of garment, a kind of attitude, and impute to him attitudes that would not be part of his response if they were to encounter him directly. For example, there is this sense of freedom of human beings and their ability that whatever the majority of human beings say, that is what is right in the eyes of God. That the idea of majority rule, the majority of human beings, whether they be electorate in a democracy or any human institution, that the voice of the people is the voice of God. And they have this idea that this groundswell from that level necessarily is the right thing in the eyes of the hierarchy, in the eyes of the presence. And I would suggest to everyone who has imputed that particular spin onto the master of the first ray to reread his life as Becket, reread his life as Sir Thomas More. Participate once again, if you care to, in the protracted examination of those lifetimes as they have been portrayed on the screen in movies about these incarnations of his lifetime. And you will find that there is present in the example of his life and of the giving of his life, the sacrifice of his life was for the defense of a principle, which, when all of the trappings are taken away, whether it is considered to be the papacy or what have you, when all of the trappings are taken away, it was the master of the first ray standing for the principle of divine hierarchy that unites all of life from the one presence in the heart of the great central sun down to not only every mortal upon the planet, but every blade of grass, every grain of sand, every particle of air and water, all of them are part of one unbroken, undivided ladder of light and hierarchy, which establishes this primacy of the presence of God above all else. He gave his life literally in defense of this cause, as it was symbolized in this case by the primacy of the papacy. But it was this greater principle that was at work, because that principle is, in fact, one of the underpinnings and undergirdings that is part of what serves as a foundation upon which the rest of life can be built. It is like the skeletal structure of a physical body. It is like the steel girders that are unseen but are present in a skyscraper. Wherever you take the concept of foundation, it is in this concept of God's will as the one will that should be present and should rule through all of life. This is a very subtle point. It is one that the world does not like to hear. And the reason that the world doesn't like to hear it, which is not always present, is because there is a flare of rebellion, of scarlet red anger and irritation that arises whenever there is anything that would hinder the expression of the separate outer self, this human ego that has come to be its apparent autonomous outer free agent in this outer world of form. And that free agency is something that the outer self wishes to preserve at all costs whatsoever. It has a don't tread on me idea, and it has wrapped itself in a sacredness that is really not there as a part of that outer ego. I might point out to every single one of you that this stand for the will of God, this stand for the principle of hierarchy, is not a stand that implies that one person is better than another, nor does it really imply that one person's free will is going to suffocate another life stream's true freedom of expression or free will. It is none other than, beloved Saint Germain, who has pioneered the modern concept of self-determination and democracy, that has stood up for the worth of each individual life stream, that has championed the cause of their freedom and their freedom of expression. However, we must be quick to point out that that was intended to foster the free will and the worth of the God self of that life stream that was striving to express through the heart flame. It was all of this great drama of the modern world's abundance, technological prowess, the degree of political and economic freedom that we have today. It was not all intended to water the parched earth of that human ego that has been in a state of suspended animation and repression for so very long, and allow it to spring back into a fuller expression of that outer self that frustrates the entire purpose of the whole cause of the Brotherhood's work. So the key is, of course, that each one must find the ability to identify themselves no longer with those voices of the outer self that feels separated, and to give expression instead to the highest level, all the way to the individualization of the mighty I Am presence, and bring that outer self over and over and over and over and over again into submission to the God presence. This is an exercise that each and every true disciple of the Ascended Masters will wish to enter into as a permanent discipline until their own ascension in the light takes place. Be assured that it is a discipline that has been well embraced by everyone who is now ascended. They have gone through a very strenuous process of stripping away that rebellious sense of the outer self, of checking it on every occasion and giving life and birth an expression to the God presence instead, to have that mighty presence come forth in their life. When beloved Jesus was trying to explain to his disciples the divine plan for his public death and public ascension and the resurrection, some of the closest disciples, including St. Peter again, poor St. Peter, he never seemed to have quite the right attunement about things. His impulse when Jesus wished to wash his feet was an impulse of pride, coached as humility. Oh, you are too good, and I'm too terrible for you to humble yourself to wash my feet. And when Jesus drew aside the veil about the path that he had chosen and embraced of the crucifixion and the resurrection, St. Peter tried to talk him out of it. And if you recall, Jesus spun around and had some very stern words to say to beloved Peter on that occasion. I mention this now, not so much because of the interaction between Jesus and Peter, but the reaction of Jesus, which was, "Get thee behind me." That was due to his own relating to his own outer self. He was always checking it. He was always making sure that those voices were not the ones that would occur. When he spoke to his mother and said, "What have I to do with thee?" Again, it was a checking and a holding in abeyance to allow the divine direction to come directly from the presence. One of the other and most important parts of all of this, as it relates to free will, is the difference between the human self, the human ego, and the God presence. As Plato, Saint Germain described the human ego as a cave, and that is a pretty appropriate description, because in that concept of a cave, what you really have is the rays of self-awareness barely go out to the edge of the aura, and immediately they make a sharp U-turn and come back to the self. So everything is about the ego, everything is related to that outer self. And in that state, a person is really cocooned within their own subjective perceptions of life. They're not able to see anything objectively. Everything is a warped, distorted perception that means that all of life is viewed through the lens of this distorted, egotistical, self-centered lens of perception. As long as the consciousness, and by that we mean the ray of the heart, is obliged to try to see out through that lens of perception, it is going to be finite, it is going to be limited. And perhaps one of the most damning penalties that is self-imposed by anyone who seeks to protect that human self, to champion its rights, its causes above all else, to elevate it to some status of permanency in the cosmos, is that one is not able to actually enter into the divine realms, the divine domains, wearing this body of human centeredness, human self-centeredness. The very nature of the divine realms, which begin beyond the level of mind and outer memory, or so-called soul, the nature of the realms of the Holy Christ presence, of the causal body, of the I Am presence, the realms of the Ascended Masters. All of these realms are levels of awareness where one's own sense of one's own personal identity is viewed in the unbroken context of a universal identity, a universal selfhood. So it is literally impossible to even rise to the level of the Christ while still hemmed in on all sides by the human ego. Because if you had a person and you put them down in that realm of the cosmic Christ, they would still be thinking about themselves. They would still be within the little tiny egg of their own introspection, their own, they'd be trapped in a world of their own reflection of their own thought and feeling, and unable to relinquish what has been guarded for so long, like a hermit crab within a chambered nautilus. The human ego protects that sense of its own separate selfhood and is therefore, by definition, incapable of enjoying or participating in the bliss and the expanded levels of being that operate beginning at the level of the Holy Christ self, the causal body, and the mighty I Am presence. So you see, when you surrender that sense of the outer ego, you actually are breaking this shard of mortality, of this introverted sense of one's personal separate selfhood, and only then are you free to participate in the greater profound allness and oneness of being that exists at the level of the Christ and of the I Am presence. That is the only way that you can actually enter into that greater sense. It is astonishing that the focus of individuality, of selfhood, whereas the mortal is represented as a darkened cave, the divine self is best symbolized by a radiating star, a star of consciousness that shines forth its radiance throughout eternity. That is everywhere that the light rays from that star have probed and penetrated and are constantly giving feedback throughout the length and breadth and depth of all of that vastness of eternity. This radiating star of selfhood knows itself to be part of a greater wholeness, part of a greater oneness. And it is to that greater one being, that one presence, that the heart or the outer self has surrendered. Your I Am presence, of course, is your permanent foundation, your permanent focus of individuality, your starry body in that greater sense of that oneness. Therefore, that is the kind of free will expression that is intended not only after the ascension takes place, but if a golden age is to come forth. It will come forth because there are noble sons and daughters of God who have mastered themselves, who have put down the need to defend the hurts, the complaints, the injury, the insults, all of those presumed objections to their own person, and to exalt in its place the oneness of that I am presence which they are with the oneness of all of life. On this subject of that divine identity, I'd like to anticipate one of the criticisms that comes our way via the outer consciousness of mankind. Suffice it to say that it is absolutely impossible for the human imagination or the carnal mind of any life stream, or certainly of the majority, to actually analyze and to assess that which we are sharing with you today of the divine ideal. Anything that is of reality, a part of God reality, if it is handled by the carnal mind, anything, no matter how pure and simple and innocent or exalted, can be stereotyped, and a caricature can be made of it, and probably will be made of it by the mortal consciousness. It will be derided. It will be stereotyped. It will be insulted. It will be made to be as a laughing stock, as if only the most foolish idiots would ever believe such pablum. This is the nature of the carnal mind. We see it very much in the entertainment media, the print media of the world today. I think if you had a little innocent newborn lamb, or a white dove, or a 1-year-old infant in a crib, that if they chose to do it, the writers on Saturday Night Live or some of the other late night talk shows could figure out ways to poke fun and to deride those blameless examples of life and make them out to be unreal. I seem to recall that the service of Mother Teresa on various occasions was satirized on some of these programs. The carnal mind can and will distort and deride what it cannot reach, what it does not understand. And when it comes to this surrender to the will of God, when it comes to this idea of this greater sense of wholeness, already there are many examples of how the world has chosen to eviscerate this image of the divine by making it a laughing stock. You will see where the label of a cult is put upon it first and foremost, where everyone who believes these things or strives to achieve them is considered to be a mindless, irrational person, and groups of such individuals put together all have their smiley faces on and the glaze over their eyes. They're caused to be thought to be mindlessly following some authoritarian leader. All of that probably will come our way at some points in the future. Even the ideas of a golden age themselves would be derided, for they would tell you, and to the carnal mind, to the outer ego, the idea of ascended master perfection would be looked upon as boring. It will be attacked as being sterile, antiseptic, without any richness or vibrancy of life about it. It will be relegated to being monotonous. It will be, as it were, a cloned concept. The ideas of perfection and of harmony will be attacked as being insipid. And one of the other greatest things that will be laid at the feet of the idea of a golden age is that it is devoid of originality. Much today is applauded in the name of something original. Originality, as the world speaks of it, is due to something that we can share with you right now. And that is that there is such a tiny bit of vitality and life that manages to eke its way through any expression in this mortal culture, that it only lasts a split second, and then it has vanished like spit on a stove. It is gone. And the mortal consciousness must have something else to titillate the senses. And in this sense, the word originality is brought up. And no longer are the beautiful, symmetrical forms of nature actually glorified anymore, but the worst caricatures out of the astral plane are exalted because they are presumably original. The truth of the matter is that when you rise into the realm of the Christ or of your mighty I Am presence of the electronic body, there is such a tidal wave flow of light and energy that you would be content for time to stand still. You would be content for that moment to last for all eternity because it is so exquisitely magnificent and beautiful, and you would want for none other. But the carnal mind cannot touch this, even in their imagination. And so they will have to tear it down. They will have to deride it in whatever way possible. And one of the ways is to make out the free will expression of those who are in their mighty presence to be a mere cloned example of some 2004 type world, 1984, whatever that movie was, where everyone was part of a regimented world. There are so many examples of this, where to be a part of the one perversion of that ideal of the divine oneness and the individuality within it is in the Star Trek idea of what was called BORG. And in that concept, every part of materiality, every part of consciousness was all built into one ever amalgamating mechanization concept that was ever getting bigger, and there was no individuality, no identity. Everything was just all amalgamated together. And that is the antithesis of what it means to re-enter into the oneness of the God presence. So we, as those who are the exponents of that golden age, will have to champion this bending of the knee to our true individual identity, which is the individuality at the level of the mighty I Am presence. For in that individuality, there is true freedom of expression. There is no loss of anything of worth whatsoever. And we will have to be sure that there is, that we point out that far from being a colorless, flavorless, bland existence, that the true Epicureans of the spirit, the true lovers of life, the ones who are really able to relish and enjoy the richness of the expression, are those who have re-entered into the divine domain and there have a great range of creativity within the divine domain, without any need for evil, any need for negativity. That's one of the other things that the carnal mind likes to dress up its own outer situation and to say, oh, you have to have conflict. You have to have mistakes. You have to have imperfection and human struggle. The whole agony and ecstasy of this mortal existence is what makes it so great. You have to have this lusty lust for life in order for it to be great. That is, of course, what this outer rebellious self will have to say. It has to dress up and make something right that is absolutely the antithesis of God reality. For anyone who wishes to slough off the carapace of their human ego and to don instead the starry body of their God identity, bear in mind that the moment that you in your consciousness wish to cross over the threshold between the outer world and the world of your Christ presence, the world of the I am presence, there is a oneness to those worlds that is a seamless, unbroken continuity of expression, such that whatever goes on within those worlds is shared by all. It is done in a way that does not interfere with anyone's consciousness. But nevertheless, there is an awareness of it all by every single part of life. You may be familiar with the idea that no two objects can occupy the same time, the same point of space at the same time. While that may be true of physical objects, it is not true of the selfhood that you are from the Buddhic world on upward. For beginning with that world, more and more there is an overlap and a mutuality of being and of selfhood, so that the radiation, the waves of consciousness, are cumulative and mutual on many parts of individuality. Because that is so, and because there are many necessary things going on in that world, none are permitted to enter there who have not learned of their own free will to put their I am presence first and to legislate harmony at all costs, to legislate purity in their expression at all costs. When there is purity and harmony, whatever their creativity may be, it enhances the quality of expression of every other part of life. But that is the only way that that entree can occur in that world. And this brings us full circle back to the issue of personal free will versus hierarchy and the will of God. For amongst all of the other God qualities that are there is the one presence that is the great bedrock reality. And lo and behold, the one presence has the one will. And every life stream in those realms is a personal focus of that one will of the one presence. And this is the lesson that all of the ascended masters learned long before their ascensions, to check the expression of their outer self and to bend the knee and to invoke the will of God for themselves as the expression of that one will. Consequently, having made that free will election and built themselves back into this great fabric of the predominant oneness of being that exists in those ascended master octaves, having chosen that freely, there is no bondage in that free will expression as the ascended being whom they become. But there is this great flexible, it is not a monolith, but there is this great fabric of the ladder of life, of the free will of that one presence that is there throughout. And as part of that, regardless of what level of hierarchy one might find oneself, there is always the recognition that there is this authority that is the expression of the one presence that is the final and ultimate authority to whom all of the brotherhood bend the knee. And in that, there is no loss, there is no sense of insult, no sense of deprivation, that somehow or another their rights are being trampled upon because someone of greater attainment is actually entering into the picture and sharing with them a greater perspective that they have on life. I'd like to share with you one of the descriptions of how this process works in the Ascended Master Octaves. The consciousness of the brotherhood is an indescribably wonderful thing. It is a great, calm, shining ocean, strangely one, such that the least thrill of expression of consciousness from any member flashes from end to end instantaneously, while yet each member continues to be absolutely their own personal and individual self-awareness, though with a weight and a power and a wisdom behind it, so that no single human consciousness could ever have imagined. This magnificent sea of cosmic consciousness is so great, so wonderful, that there is nothing comparable to it in this world of form. And even those who are part of it by virtue of having passed the first initiations only catch rare glimpses of that consciousness, remembering but little of it here and now. It can only be felt fully on the plane of the causal body realm on which the brotherhood exists. Even as a circle of disciples are to act as one in their chela-ship to one guru, even so, all of the brotherhood relates to its Lord. The members freely discuss point by point among themselves, yet it is as though different aspects of the same case are presented in the same mind and by that mind weighed one against the other. But one is all the time in the presence of a tremendous, awful serenity, a certainty which nothing ever disturbs. Somehow in all of that, every suggestion is still welcomed, and there is the sensation that the whole brotherhood is keenly alert and awaiting each one's contributions on every subject. Nothing down here below can compare to that consciousness, and yet to touch it is to come in contact with something very new, yet inexpressibly wonderful and beautiful. Although individualities are so strangely merged into this one ocean of consciousness of the brotherhood, each one is sharply delineated, and the ascent of each brother contributes to every decision of importance. The rule of the hierarch is absolute, and yet this hierarch carries his vast counsels with him and is at every moment considerate of every point that occurs to any one of the members. This great governing body differs utterly from any parliament or Congress of the earth. Those who stand above the rest in positions of authority have not been elected, have not been appointed by some party or organization. They hold their positions because of their attainment, won by their superior wisdom. None doubts the decision of his superior because he knows that he really is greater in attainment. He has greater insight and a fuller power to decide. There can be no shadow of compulsion in any of this. Nevertheless, no requirement that all should act in lockstep with one another. And yet there is this supreme confidence in this great body of the brotherhood is so perfect that it is unthinkable in the long run that there should ever be the slightest bit of true disagreement. To be an ascended master is to enter into that fellowship and membership as part of the brotherhood. You may rest assured that as you listen for the still small voice of your own mighty I Am presence, not stopping until you have reached that mountaintop of your own electronic body's direction. When you have reached that, and you have brought all of your vehicles of consciousness into subjection to that will of the presence for you, there will no longer be the island or the cave of the human ego, but these outer bodies will be, as they have always been intended, to be chalices for that one individual presence whom you are. And you will have fit yourself for membership and welcoming into that circle of communion, which is the brotherhood of light. This, which is described as that ascent, is also what is needed here below for a golden age to come to pass, for there to be such a willingness to submit to the greater plan of the brotherhood, the greater will of the brotherhood, to let that come through, that more and more hundreds and thousands will be the chalice for the dawning golden age of beloved Saint Germain. Thank you.